Happy June and happy Pride. Celebrating pride in all of us. All this month, Richard Skipper celebrates those that are making a difference in the LGBTQ community. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. Happy June, happy Pride, happy everything. Tonight, we are celebrating the phenomenal photographer, Bobby Miller. We're going to discuss pride, photography, poetry. If any of you happen to be in Hudson, New York, one of the gayest places on the planet, this side of Provincetown, starting on the 15th and through August, you will be able to see at the Artsy Gallery Bobby Miller's photographs on display. But you don't have to wait until then. We've got him in the house tonight. Bobby, I am so thrilled that you said yes to joining me on this very hot, hazy, humid Sunday in New York.
Well, I'm just thrilled that you invited me, Richard. It's great. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time.
Very nice.
And, it's a perfect day for this, just to stay in and stay cool. So,
well, I want to start. We are celebrating Pride. You know, when the Pride flag was created, each color, that's why I'm wearing purple tonight, actually I discovered is violet on the flag, stands for harmony. And I want to go back, you know, and talk about what Pride personally means to you.
You know, I grew up, I was born in the early 50s and grew up in the 60s in Washington, D.C., where I lived for a long time, my childhood. And then I left D.C. in 69 and went to San Francisco, which seemed like the right time to do that, and learned everything that I now know in terms of our gay life. You know, San Francisco, of course, in the 60s was the hate, and I think every teenage boy ran away to San Francisco in the 60s to find themselves and to find gay life. I lived there for a few years, and then I eventually moved to Manhattan in 73. And that was really where I found my true calling in life. You know, New York was just one of those great cities then. Different city now, but such a different city then. And I remember going to the first gay pride march that I had ever been to in New York, in the Village, and took photographs, and then subsequently went back every year for 30 years and photographed it every year, which was great because I built up huge archives. But more than that, it gave me a personal and up-close perspective on our community and the diversity in our own community. You know, when people talk about diversity and they think of, well, gay, LGBTQ, there's all this diversity. But, you know, and there is this great diversity within our community. And you know, Pride every year, I kept thinking that somehow we would get to a place where we didn't need to do marches that were protesting our lack of civil liberties, but rather that the parade would turn into a celebration of our lives and who we are, and how that has changed so much over the last 30 years. Now it's changing. It seems to be changing again. You know, I'm not in touch with anyone from the community of people that put together the Gay Pride Parade in New York, but I certainly do read everything that people write about it. And there seems to be a constant battle in the gay community about, you know, have we gotten too commercial? and all the floats and all of the sponsors and all the brands that are there, that are in the parade. I understand that you have to advertise to sell your product if you have a product, but I don't really think that we are a product, though I do recall the moment when I realized that I had a choice as to whether I should spend my money here or there. And if I spent my money there, it was going to people who don't like me or you, and who was against all of our rights. And when that's a big discovery, when you're young and you're gay and you realize, oh, I don't have to give my money to this company. I don't have to support these people. I don't have to denounce them or diminish them, but I certainly don't have to support them. So there are all of those types of things that, we're not necessarily thinking about in our 20s, and some people certainly still in their 30s. Being gay means a party, going to Fire Island, going to P-Town, going to a club, and all of those things are great. But for me, at my age, I sort of am at this point in life where I'd rather work in a slightly different way. And so I try to do that in my work as a writer and as a photographer. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and they certainly are. The right picture can tell you everything that's going on. So,
well, a photograph can capture a moment like this and take us back. When I look at your photographs, and I've been really enjoying looking back at your photographs, you really do capture so much of our community, things that have changed, things that have progressed, truly a real history. And, all the things that you just mentioned in your opening statements, there's so much to digest there. And I want to go back a little bit, if I may,
Sure.
I know that you were born in Washington, D.C., but I want to talk about the 5-year-old Bobby Miller growing up in Washington, D.C. And there's a reason why I go back to this. If you've seen my previous shows, to me, that is the purest source of who we are. It's that time in our lives before we start school, before peer pressure is put upon us, before our teachers start defining who we should be or should not be. And I just want to know what your childhood was like as a 5-year-old boy growing up in Washington, D.C. If you can take us back and tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I was born in D.C., and then my parents quickly moved out of the city and into the suburbs of Maryland. So I grew up in Prince George's County, which is between Washington and Baltimore, which later turned out to be very convenient when I met all of the Dreamlanders from John Waters and Divine and all of those kids. I'm really, really fortunate and blessed. My parents belonged to 1950s, 40s, 50s style motorcycling clubs. I wouldn't call them bikers because they weren't really that, but they really were part of. That was their scene, and every weekend my older sisters would babysit my brother and I, so that my parents could go off on their motorcycles. And also, they would have parties at our home, and they would take all the furniture out of the living room and put it in the backyard with Christmas lights in the trees, and they would move the beds outside so that all the children of these adults would be out in the backyard having this incredible sort of Peter Pan slumber party, while my parents played on a 1950s hi-fi rock and roll music and danced in the living room. And they would fill the bathtub up with ice and put all their beer in the bathtub. That's not a normal childhood. So,
it wasn't my childhood, I'll tell you that.
At the same time, both of my parents were really just the salt of the earth people, though, they have very little education. My father had a 3rd grade education. My mother had a 5th grade education. And so, they did the best that they could do. But the two things that if I have to attribute something to them, the two different things that they said, which really prepared me for the life that was ahead for me. My mother said, and always said, you can be anything you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. No one can stop you. This is your choice. This is your life. You make it what you want it to be. You be whoever you want to be. So I think she probably must have known something about, or some instinctive insight about who I was. I mean, I remember my mother coming home, and my older sister was babysitting me and my brother, but she was on the phone talking to a boy or something. And as soon as my mother was gone, I went into her room and into her closet and put all her clothes on, as one does at that age.
Absolutely.
And, my mother came home, and I heard her coming up the stairs, and I broke into a sweat, and she came in and she opened the closet door and saw me and patted me on the head and got what she wanted and closed the door and left.
I love this.
And never mentioned it again, And to me, that really showed this great insight that my mother was a conscious person and who was aware that whatever it is, it wasn't none of her business, My father, on the other hand, who really came up scrapping on the streets of DC, and who was always in fights and fighting and coming home with, signs of being in some sort of scuffle. His advice to me was always watch your back. And I thought, well, why should I have to watch my back? And it made me aware that there were people in the world who would do me harm. And so that I should keep an eye out for those people. And, those two simple things alone always stayed with me. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe someone else would have been like, my father made me paranoid by making me worry about danger, but I don't think so. I think it was really, in the end, it was really a beneficial thing to me. And then, my father and I, like many gay men, had, issues, with each other. And it wasn't until much later, after I had left home, after I had moved to New York, and I went home to see my father and mother, and I brought my lover with me at the time, and worrying the whole time, was my father going to be receptive? And he was wonderful. He was really wonderful. And he thanked my boyfriend, husband, lover at the time, and said, thank you so much for taking care of my son, And I just, at the time that happened, it just seemed that would never happen. That's not something I would ever expect. So, so I feel really blessed and fortunate because I had great parents. I grew up at a great time. I was born in 52. So by 62 at 10, I was really aware of the culture and pop culture of the early 60s. By 67, I was 15 and left home and was an adult at 15 and, dating men in their 30s and 40s. And, I always lied about my age. And, it never dawned on me in those moments that I could have caused a lot of problems for those men. But, I'm always a big supporter of young people, young gay people, because your family does not teach you how to be gay. They do not teach you how to survive in the world of being gay. They do not certainly, and probably straight people too, unless they're from a really progressive family, they don't really teach you about sex or what you're supposed to do or where do you learn about these things. Mm-hmm. Well, the only way we're left as children, we're left we're on our own. And that's not a good thing because though I was really fortunate and lucky because of the time that I lived in, I certainly could have been in danger with awful men, but that never happened to me. My experience with that was, this is my life. This is the way I grew up. This is how I learned about these things, and I was really glad to have had those experiences because by the time I was really an adult, by the time I was 18 or 19, I was really much more prepared to deal with the world at large, the gay world at large, and I, I have lots of friends who didn't have those experiences. They didn't come out until very, very late. My husband, who I've been with for 21 years, he, went to Catholic schools and, was a very good little Catholic boy. And he didn't come out until almost 30. And when he told me that, I felt sad about that. I felt like, wow, you all of that part of your youth, you missed out on these opportunities. But I assure you, he made up for that later on in his 30s and 40s. But as a child, for me, I have great memories. I have great memories of being a kid and all the things, all the discoveries about art, music. My mother, because she was part of that sort of group of her friends who would peel back the rugs and move the furniture and dance. My mother taught me how to dance when I was 7 and 8 years old, and I knew all the dances, and my mother often would say, if my father didn't feel like going, she'd say, oh, come on, Bobby, come with me. We're going to go to the beer joint or the hillbilly place down the road, and we'll go dancing. And so for me, I had a great childhood, and, and I'm always very compassionate and sympathetic about young gay people who didn't have those lives. You must be familiar with this kid. Desmond is amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I love Desmond. I just think, and I really respect his parents a great deal. It's not an easy thing to deal with when your child comes in and is confused about their gender. That was not an issue for me. But I had other friends who had children who had those issues, and they were not supportive. And they, we all know those kids whose parents put them in, in an institution because they just couldn't understand or deal with that happen. Not my son or not my daughter, But I'd like to think that where we are now at this time in history, now that we have everything. And everybody has everything, and you can pretty much be whoever you want to be. And there are now, I believe, less people who hate us and more people who love or accept us, as opposed to the early days when you felt like if you found somebody who supported you and was encouraging to you, that was a rare thing because you really took your life in your hands to tell anybody what your preference was or, what your life, what the life that you were looking to have.
I want to go back and I want to ask a couple of questions based on some of the things you've just said here. And I want to go back to your mom, for example, opening the closet door. That's a euphemism right there. And patting you on the head and then moving on. When was the first time, or what is your first experience of hearing the word no presented to you in terms of something that you wanted to do with your life? And how did that affect you, either good or bad?
I never heard no from my parents, except no, you can't borrow the car.
Right.
Other than that, they pretty much left me to my own devices, and as long as I was home, not too much later than they told me to be home, they were okay,
But when was the first time that you heard no beyond your family circle?
I mean, I don't recall on a personal note anyone telling me no, but from a larger, more generalized thing, the culture told you no, society told you no. I remember the moment I realized that everything that I was doing, everything that I thought, everything that I was, and everything that I hoped to be was against the law. And, it was an overwhelming reality check,
And excuse me for interrupting you, but some people watching may not realize that this was against the law. If you could do everything you had if anyone found out.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't really realize I mean, especially a lot of people who were born within the last 30 or 40 years, you know, they've grown into this culture where this simply is. We are part of this culture. There's no ignoring us. But there was life before Boy George. There was life before George Michael. There was life before Liberace. There was life before Johnny Ray. You know, there was gay life, and it was there, and it was underground and kind of hidden. I remember when I was probably in maybe 3rd grade, my parents moved us to the Chesapeake Bay area, to a beach town, which was kind of a great thing that your parents are moving you to the beach, because we had lived in the suburbs, and I remember when we moved there, the house next door to us, because they were summer rentals, this couple rented this house, and I remember seeing them coming and going, and they always kept their blinds closed. You never could see in their house, but you would see them only when they would come out of their house to get in their car, and they were two men, which took me a while to discern that they were men, because I never saw men like this before. And they were dressed identical. They dressed exactly alike, and they weren't twins, you know. And I realized, you know, later on, of course, I would often see couples like that, and I guess it was a thing that I just didn't know about, you know. And I think, and now that I'm mentioning it, I'm thinking, I think that's something worth researching, you know, about gay men who are sort of living in their own world, regardless of what the world around them says, you know. And then, of course, you know, the first time I went into a gay bar, and I had fake ID, and I was 15, and my best friend was 14.
Was this in San Francisco?
No, this is in Washington.
Okay.
In DC. We would take the bus downtown from Maryland, from the suburbs down to the city. And we had, in junior high school, we met, my best friend and I met. His name was Emmett Bird. He was from the South. And Emmett and I, once we met, we realized, you know, we're different than all of the rest of these people, but we really couldn't put a word to it, you know. And also because, despite the fact that my father ended up in such a positive relationship with my father, but, you know, he was poorly educated. He grew up at a time when the culture was not accepting of anything, racism, homophobia, you know, he was guilty of all of it. And I remember him listening to a conversation that he was having with another man, and using, you know, the word faggot and, you know, queers and stuff. And I kept thinking, what is that? You know, what is he talking about? You know? And then he said something, you know, really vulgar. And I was like, oh, that's what he's talking about, you know? And I thought, well, that's strange. I thought that was totally strange. Why, what do you care? You know, if you're not gay, then what do you care what someone else does? It didn't make any sense to me, but it did not affect me in a negative way. It didn't make me fearful but I learned that, you know, I can't discuss this with my father, you know. Though years later in my 20s, you know, my father made a confession to me that because he was a long distance truck driver, and I was living in New York, and I came home to see my family. My father said, come with me to go to the grocery store. So I jumped in his truck and went to the store with him, and we were talking about something, and then he changed the subject with one statement and then quickly changed it back, as though that statement, he didn't want to really talk about it, but he wanted me to know about it. And that was that on his long distance journeys across the country at truck stops that he had on cold, lonely nights, a little knock at the door on his truck, you know, and so I said to him, you know, and laughing, I said to him, are you telling me that you've had gay sex? Is that what you're telling me? And he was like, well, I just want you to know that I'm not, I have a lot more experience in life than you know. And I just thought that was very dear. That was great that he shared that with me.
Your father was bisexual? Do you think there's
No, I don't think he was at all. But then again, listen, growing up, when I was 15 and 16, I haven't always had long hair, but I did have long hair during those years of the 60s. And, and I was 15, 16 and skinny as a rail. And, and I imagine I was probably pretty effeminate at that age. And I certainly went with a lot of men who were married men or straight men, and who, when you're having those sexual liaisons with men like that, they're great when it's happening. And then when it's over, they're angry at themselves because they're closeted. They don't know what to do about it. And they can often then turn on you because you symbolize something to them that they can't deal with. So that only happened a couple of times. And, I don't know, I'm either stupid or brazen, but I remember both of those times saying to the person and putting my hand on their hand and saying, oh, come on now, didn't you, are you really happy? You seem to really enjoy what we just did. So, now why are you unhappy about that? And in one case, the person actually opened up to me, and I ended up becoming a great friend to that person, and they changed their life. The other one, just, I don't know what happened to him. He went back into the closet, or maybe he wasn't in the closet at all. I'm convinced that there are, that men are capable of anything, and they can have boyfriends, girlfriends, they can have boyfriends and girlfriends, and I don't necessarily think of a man as being a closeted homosexual because he had sex with another man. I think that he had sex with another man because he liked it and it was fine and he has no issues with it. But, some days maybe he likes to have apples and some days he likes to have a peach, and that doesn't...
Oysters or snails.
Yeah, exactly. But, so that was part of growing up in that time period too. You weren't only just being confronted with yourself and who you were and what you were, who you were, but you were confronted with everyone you met who was a potential, sex partner or a potential boyfriend or, and it's sort of, I've been down this road before and, and I had seen other friends, I have an awful lot of friends who are transgendered and as far back as the 60s when it was just a completely different thing. And if you were talented enough or fortunate enough to be able to pass as a woman, then you could have a relatively normal life for yourself. But that wasn't the case for most people. It was before feminization surgery. It was before you could go to a doctor and get a prescription for hormones, to soften your appearance. One of my very closest friends when I was 15 was also 15 and grew up in an Italian family with all sisters, the only boy in an Italian family. And it really suddenly dawned on his father one day that he hadn't really noticed his son very much. And that even though it was the 60s and, it was not unusual for boys to have long hair, men to have long hair, his son had long hair, but he also had plucked eyebrows and fingernails, long fingernails. And it was at that moment that his father said, okay, he couldn't go to school. He was dropping out of school because he wouldn't show up. He would just not go to school and tell his parents he was going to school. Well, eventually, his father found out he had dropped out of school and said, well, all right, you're not going to sit at home and do nothing, as they say to you when you're that age. But so you either have to have a job or you are going to have to go back to school. So his father owned a construction company. So he said, well, tomorrow morning, you're going to work for me. And his father had work sites all over the metropolitan area. So he took him to this work site where there were 20 carpenters and electricians working. And he said, your job is to stay in this little hut with a little half door open, and they will come and say, I need a hammer. And you get the hammer and you give it to them, and they have to sign for it, and they have to make sure they return it, and you sign that they returned it. And that's your job. And he left him there and he drove away. Well, the father came back a few hours later, and the door was closed. And he said, oh, my son's just left, Well, he went and opened the door, and he was in there with two carpenters.
Oh, my God.
And so, there was no way around it. But his father ended up, supporting him, paying for his surgery, for her surgery. She had transsexual surgery. She transitioned at, I think, 19. Mm-hmm. And her father became her father's favorite daughter. He bought her a new Cadillac every year. And her sisters were jealous because she became, the favorite daughter. And, but, that was a happy ending. And it wasn't like that for most people,
That's absolutely true.
I went through that a lot with a lot of people, and supported and counseled those friends of mine that were dealing with that. There were no real answers then. It really was just a matter of, you'll get through this. Tomorrow's another day. You'll find your way. I'll help you. There are other people like you, and there were no services there were no social services that you could go to that were going to help you in this transition. So that has always been a big cause for me, even though I've never been transgendered or confused about my gender at all. But I think that nowadays, and as a survivor of the gay holy wars, as I like to refer to them, and I've written a lot about this in my work, I just think it's really important to be supportive and patient with people as they find their way. It's not any of my business or your business what they are doing. Mm-hmm. It's their business, Mm-hmm. And I don't understand. I just don't understand straight people. And there are 32 states that Republicans have now drawn up bills for this next election season to do away with all rights for transgendered people in 32 states.
Let me point out that DeSantis signed the anti-transgender bill in Florida on the first day of Gay Pride Month.
Well,
these are not accidents, folks, that are happening.
No. They're purposeful.
But I want to ask you going back to something that you said that your father said to you, to always watch your back. When was the first, was there one particular episode in your life where you really realized for the sake of your own sanity, identity, whatever you want to call it, that you had to watch your back?
Actually, no. Honestly, I've lived in some of the toughest areas of some incredible cities. Mm-hmm. I lived in Manhattan for almost 40 years. I never once in New York was hassled or attacked or beaten up or threatened. One time, I came home one night and I got out of the taxi and went across the street to my front door, and I saw this small shadowy figure come out of a doorway and try to beat me to the door. But I got there first, and I went in and I put my foot against the outer door and the key in the inner door, and he pushed the door open and stuck this much of his face in the door and said, "Give me your money." And he had to be all of 15 or 16 years old. He said, "Give me your money." And I got really close to his face because I had a good grip on the door. And I said, "Or what?" He said, and then he wrangled up this baseball bat and showed me just the tip of the bat, "Or I'll hit you with this." I leaned forward and I licked him right up his face.
Oh!
And I said, "I suggest you better get out of here before I drag you in here and fuck you with that bat."
Oh my God.
And I opened the door and he took off running. Other than that, listen, my mother said I had a gift to gab. I should have been a lawyer. You know, my way has always been, rather than to be physically violent, that your words can do a lot. And if you say the right words, you can completely disarm a person. So for me, you know, I guess I was kind of fearless, but you know, a lot of that had to do with leaving home so young. You know, you really learn to protect yourself, and certainly there were men in my teens when I would be in a bar or at some place where there were gay men, and they would, you know, try to manhandle you or grab you or, you know, feel you up or something, right? Mm-hmm. And I would just like act really nice, and then I would rub their hand, and then I'd put my fingers under their wrist and bend it backwards and take them to the ground and say, I'm going to let you up in a minute, and if you touch me again, I'm going to break your arm. Mm. And then I'd let go of them and they'd leave me alone. You know, so, and I would teach other young gay people how to protect themselves too, you know. So, but, you know, after a while, that just sort of, that only happened a few times. I mean, you know, I was too busy enjoying my life. I was too busy having a fabulous time. I was too busy looking for the next party. You know, I wanted to enjoy this gay life, you know. And
I want to ask you, you left home when you were 15.
Yes.
What were the circumstances surrounding your leaving home, and why did you choose San Francisco over New York, which was closer?
Yeah. Well, partially because the song Flowers in Your Hair had come out. You know, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear flowers in your hair. Mm-hmm. All the lyrics of that song are really about telling the youth at that time, come to San Francisco. It's the summer of love. We'll all be in it together, you know. And so I had that vision in my head, and I would see it on television. I remember sitting on the floor in front of the TV in my parents' house, and a news reporter reporting about San Francisco, and him saying how there's this abundance of influx of young people. They've taken over the streets. And of course, the camera panned the streets. And as far as you could see, it was all young people, you know. And I had enough experience at that time to pick out the ones in that crowd that were the ones that I was looking for. And I knew that they were gay. And so for me, and I also had met someone from San Francisco, and an older guy, and he had told me about San Francisco. It just sounded like too good to be true, you know. And I used to lay in bed as a young kid when I was maybe 13 or so with a portable radio under the pillow, and so my parents couldn't hear it. And I would listen to New York radio stations, and I would listen to them play the greatest music that I had never heard before. Mm-hmm. And then they would talk about, oh, you know, this Thursday at this club's, you know, this person's performing. It's going to be great, and so is going to be there. And so I thought, oh my God, you know, I have to move to New York. But then I knew someone who had moved to New York and moved back, and they said, you can't. He said, you really have to have money to live there. It's a very expensive city. And, you know, there are it's not San Francisco. It's not like hippies in the park who are going to take you into their commune and give you food and free love. You know, it's hard living. It's New York City street life. And I would suggest to you that you not even consider going there until you have some money in your pocket, until you're a little bit older, because, you know, it's just not a safe place for kids, so to speak. But then when I did go to San Francisco, my friend and I both went, and I didn't run away. I told my mother I was leaving, and she gave me $100. Like, that lasted very long. Mm-hmm. But when we got there, and we got a little room that had a Murphy bed that folded down out of the wall in the Tenderloin area, but we checked in the daytime. And then we spent the rest of that day sort of getting our little apartment ready. And then at nighttime, we decided to go out, and we walked out the door. And both sides of the street, as far as you could see, were boy hustlers. Wow. And I thought, oh, wow, this is San Francisco, wow, that's incredible. I thought that was incredible. And then, of course, we walked it around and we found Polk Street, which at that time was all male hustlers and or gay people cruising or everything. And so, and I met great people, Janis Joplin lived down the row from us. Like I could see her over my backyard, like in her yard. And I was like, oh my God, it's Janis, And so that was really fabulous. But then when I left San Francisco, it was kind of changing, the hippie thing was ending. And now it was David Bowie and orange spiky hair and skin tight clothes. And so when I came back to DC, to my mother's house after I left San Francisco, my friend came to my best friend, who I hadn't seen because he didn't go to San Francisco. So he came over to see me and to take me out to a club. And I think I had on denim blue jean bell bottoms covered in patches and beads and long hair and complete hippie. And I said, what happened to you? Where's your hair? Why did you cut your hair? And he said, I'm sorry, but you look like an antique. You need to cut that hair off. You need to get rid of those rags you're wearing. And that's not what's happening. What's happening now is very sophisticated. All your clothes are ironed and pressed. Everything fits perfectly. You had to have these platform shoes. You had to have this whole look. And so, I went for it and it was great. And, but I didn't last long in DC when I came back. I realized then that, it's still a conservative town. They still threw rocks at me when I walked down the street. And I would dodge them and laugh to myself and think, what's wrong with these people? They must really be miserable. How miserable they must be to be spending all their time stuck in this place of hate, But so then I moved to New York on April Fool's Day of '73. And that should have told me something, right away. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm loving these stories. They're incredible.
Well, so then when I moved to New York, I had a room. I had moved out of my mother's house for a little bit and moved on to Capitol Hill in DC. And I had a roommate who was a big country boy from Louisiana who worked for a congressman on Capitol Hill. And I said to him, he came home and I was packing and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm leaving. He said, where are you going? And I said, I'm moving to New York. I cannot stand another day in this town. And he said, well, you're not leaving me here. So, and he had a car. So I said, great. So we went to New York. We found a little apartment on the Upper East Side, doorman building, 2-bedroom doorman building on the Upper East Side. The rent was $280 a month. Now it's probably $8,000 a month. But so when we got to New York, I had always cut hair. I started cutting my mother's hair when I was about 14, and so I was a hairdresser, and so I just knew how to do it. It was just I've always said, as an art director of a hair salon at one point in New York, I used to tell students that I was training, there's only two kinds of hairdressers, the ones who are born to cut hair and the ones who go to school to learn. And there's just something about a person who has this natural gift for perception and depth and length and content and volume and all of those things that make up the scientific aspect of cutting a head of hair, So I worked for a long time in a salon. I got a job working in Long Island, which meant that I would go against the traffic in the morning. Everyone was coming into the city and I was going out to Long Island. And then in the evening, I'd get off work and I'd be heading back and everyone would be coming back. So it's kind of great, actually, and I felt really special about that I was able to sort of maneuver without being bothered or disturbed by anyone through this sea of humanity, which New York was. And then I decided, I talked to this guy and I said, well, I met another hairdresser one night at a club or something. And I said, well, where do you work? And he said, I work in my home where I live, and I don't have to give any of my money to anyone. I work for myself. I freelance. And I discovered freelancing and said, oh, what a great idea. So I worked for another month and made cards with my number on it and secretly gave them to my clients. And then I left and I came into the city, and they followed me into the city. And so then for the next, 20 years, I freelanced, but I also just met so many great people, and it exposed me to so much. I work with great fashion photographers as a hairdresser, and then my another friend was an incredible makeup artist and taught me how to do makeup. So by that point, I had an agent who represented me as a hairdresser and said, if you did hair and makeup, you can make twice as much money. And now it's sort of the trend in these large companies. They don't want to hire two people. They want to hire one person. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I made that transition. And then I ended up working at Saturday Night Live for a while. I worked on Broadway. I worked in film and television and theater. And then I guess around 2000, at 9/11, when 9/11 happened, I said, it's time to leave. It's time to get the hell out of here. It just seemed like New York, after Giuliani had become mayor, it just seemed like it was not going in the direction that I was going to be happy about. And it just seemed like it was time to go. And living there for that long was a great, fun thing to do. And I also met this really great guy who's my husband. Mm-hmm. And we dated for about a year, long distance. I would go up to P-Town to see him. And I didn't like P-Town. I had been there one summer acting in a play, and I just didn't like some of the gay boys from Boston. I just didn't like the way they treated each other. They had an attitude. And so I just didn't like it. And then, my husband at the time said to me, well, you have to come and see me. Don't worry about what they're like. So I went to see him, and I had such a wonderful time. And I discovered the light in Provincetown as an artist is, now I know why so many painters moved there and live there and make art there, and even though I use mostly studio lighting, I do appreciate natural light, and I have done a lot of work with natural light. But so I sort of then fell in love with Provincetown and stayed for 21 years, mm-hmm. And gave up my little apartment in the West Village. I kept it for the first 6 or 7 years and sublet it. And then I was living in this great house with my husband, and I thought, I'll never live in that tiny little studio apartment in the village again. Lady Bunny lived downstairs from me.
Oh, wow.
Or as I was fond of saying, she's beneath me, but she loves that joke. And, but so, Bunny is a great friend. I did all of Bunny's wigs for Wigstock for 20 years.
Wow. Wow.
And I did a book on Wigstock. I've published 21 books.
Yes.
Wigstock is one of them. And that was a lot of fun, really a lot of fun. That whole stretch of 20 years of Wigstock was really, really fun.
Now, let me ask you, first of all, we're going to run out of time. I could go for 4 days with you. No, absolutely. My show, as I've said before, is about celebrating people and their body of worth. And you certainly have exceeded that tonight. So thank you for that. I want to ask you, are you going to be in Hudson for the gallery opening?
I am, yeah. My show opens the 19th of June at Artsy at 529 Warren Street. And I will be there for the whole evening. It's from 6 to 10, and it's it's like the big opening night party. And Julio Santiago, who owns the gallery and space, the front of his business, he sells eyeglass frames, and really beautiful, expensive eyeglass frames. But then he has this enormous gallery, and he had sort of, his friends had kept saying you should have a gallery, and he was like, oh, I don't know anything about it. And now I'll be his fourth person that has shown in this space. And I really want to support him completely because it's a great space and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. So he's putting together this opening night party with, I think he said there's going to be celebrity lookalikes dressed as Studio 54 people. And he's going to have, a DJ and go-go boys and all of that. And I was like, well, that's the party. But the show itself will be up through all of August. So that's it. That's just the opening night of the party. And if you're out there, come.
I'm going to try to get there. I mean, I've performed in Hudson, but it's been years since I've been there. And now that we are, what was that?
I only live 25 minutes from Hudson. I live in Egremont, which is right next to Great Barrington.
So you're no longer in Provincetown.
No. We sold our home and left and moved here in November of this past year. And it took almost 3 years to make this move because we started thinking about selling our home, and then the pandemic hit, and then no one would come and look at our home. And then I kept saying, we have to get out of here. Last 2 winters seasons in Provincetown has flooded. The town flooded. The basement of the town hall flooded. The street beyond town hall flooded. People's basements flooded all the way to the ceiling. And a week later, the next storm came and flooded them even higher. And so a lot of my friends who have homes there on the bay, they either lost their homes because they just couldn't afford to make those repairs, or they made those repairs and then it happened again. And now they've made those repairs again. And now what's to stop that from happening a third or fourth time? I'm a big advocate about global warming and being conscious of it and being aware of it. And it just seemed to me like it was time to get away from the ocean, and I love the mountains. It's really incredible here. I don't know whether you've ever been to the Berkshires, but
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And we found a great home, wonderful home. I love my new home. And it's great because it's so close to Hudson and it's 8 minutes from downtown Great Barrington. So
I asked for you to send me a few photographs that you sent and these photographs will be on display as part of your exhibit. Am I correct?
These are from the exhibit.
And so, if I'm not mistaken, all of these photographs that we're going to see are from the heyday of Studio 54. I have to have you back to talk about all of that.
Yeah,
but here is one of your photographs.
Grace Jones.
And
me in the mirror behind her.
Wow.
Yeah.
And of course,
Andy, of course.
Yes.
Chris Walken.
Yes.
He was so handsome. And I traced him around all night long to get that picture. And he was facing the other direction. And I just stood there behind him. And then he turned around. And then he just let me take his pictures.
Now, this next photograph I love because these are two people that when you think Studio 54, you don't necessarily think of Donnie and Marie.
No. Well, listen, I think it really was it was 77. So it was kind of the height of their careers just really starting to take off. And I'm sure their publicist said to them, you have to go to Studio 54. Everybody's there. And so, but they came in. That look on Marie's face is one of like sheer terror at the types of people that she was probably surrounded by. Donnie, on the other hand, looks excited about it all. But they weren't there long. They didn't stay long. They came in with their publicist and security guards. They went through the club, and then and as soon as they came in, there was a pack of photographers chasing them, and the photographers were all behind them, and I turned around and they were literally like right there.
Wow!
And I only got that one shot. That's it.
And I love this next shot because I was lucky enough. I was at a party with Gloria Swanson once.
She's a wonderful person. She was a wonderful lady.
And just love this. And of course, this man has been in the news a lot lately.
Well, yes, of course, because of my friend Dan Menahan directed this series about Halston that's on Netflix. And I saw it and I thought it was a great production. They did a great job on the production itself. They did a great job recreating studio, they shot it in Halston's house, which I've been in. And all of that was good. But my big complaint is the same complaint I have when filmmakers make films, not documentaries, but make fictional films based on a real person's life. They inevitably get it wrong. They do not necessarily interview the right people. They interview the people and they use what they think will tell the best story. And I understand that as an artisan and as a photographer and as a storyteller. However, Elsa Peretti was never Halston's assistant. She would be turning over in her grave to have been depicted that way because she was a very proud and talented artist. You know, the girl that plays Liza Minnelli is great. I knew that she was Liza the minute she opened her mouth. She really nailed Liza. But as a hairdresser, Liza never had a bob. You know, she never had that haircut. And that's just simply either the costume designer and the hair and makeup person on the set didn't do their research, or they thought, well, this will do, or this is the way, you know, it's just one of those details, you know. So that sort of disturbed me. And other people that I know who were there and who were, you know, actually at studio and actually knew what the things that happened, and I knew all of the people in the film. I knew Victor Hugo, and you know, yes, Victor was a character, and yes, Victor was a mess, but he was never a mess to me. He was always lovely to me and kind to me, and you know, so I can only go by my own experience. I've heard horror stories and I believe them, but luckily for me, he was my friend and treated me great. You know, other people, Joe Eula, who is depicted as being Halston's assistant and the person who helps make decisions for him. Joe was a gifted, brilliant designer in his own right, and that really should have somehow been, you know, pointed out, but it wasn't. It made it look like that was his only calling in life, was to do this thing for Halston. So little things like that. But you know, I've learned over the years not to get too upset about how other people remember things. You know, I luckily have a total recall. I have a great memory, and it's at 69. I still have a great memory, and I remember things in detail. You know, so for me, I'm forgiving about it, but you know, all they have to do, and my advice to all those filmmakers who take on something like that, is do your research, talk to people who were there, people who were actually a part of something, you know. And I know that was difficult to do because all of those people are dead. You know, everyone that's depicted in the film is dead, the main characters. So
except for Liza. Liza's very much with
Liza, but you know, Liza's so old school, and she's, you know, she knows what you say and what you don't say, because in the end, it doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters how the public saw that. How do the fans see it? Because in the end, the fans are the only thing that's important.
Well, Bobby, first of all, I'm so sorry that our time is ending, but I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to be respectful of the time of everyone that's here. I've got one last question that I want to ask you before I do my closing remarks. And out of all the experiences that you've had and your memoirs, you've got to write your...
I've been working on them for about 5 years now. So
when you're ready to publish, I hope that you'll come back and talk to me, either here or even on stage somewhere.
Well, yeah, and I hope that your viewers will go to my Blurb site and check out all of my books. You know, they're all from my archives over a 40-year period, and so everybody's in them, and it's so they're all there on Blurb, and I don't know how to give them that information.
Well, I will tell you, you give it to me, and I will include it in the information when this is on YouTube.
Is that backwards?
No, it's not. But if you send that to me, I will get it. I will get it into the feed for me. Just send it in a private message. But I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Happy Pride to everybody out there. The lessons that I've gotten from Bobby tonight are to celebrate yourselves and celebrate each other. Celebrate the person that you don't know necessarily. Because as a dear friend of mine says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And you never know what someone is going through right now. So just, I always end my shows by telling everyone to go to your Facebook friends list. Today, go to the 6th name that pops up and reach out with a phone call. Not an email message, not a text message, not a private inbox message, but a phone call. And let those people know what they mean to you. If you enjoyed tonight's show, and I hope you did, please hit the like button, leave a comment. That helps in the ranking of these videos. And also, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to Richard Skipper Celebrates right here on YouTube. And again, I'm all about celebrating artists and their body of worth. Now, Bobby, I'm going to give you the final word tonight. Leave the screen because this is about you. Anything that we talked about tonight that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to everyone who's watching right now. And I thank you so much. And I'm going to try to get to Hudson. I'd love to give you a real hug.
That would be great. That would be great.
I'm going to try to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Well, I guess we lost Bobby. Are you still here, Bobby? Are you still here?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to give you the final word tonight.
Oh, okay, good. Because what I was going to say was, for me, there should be a place at the table for everyone. Everyone deserves to eat. Everyone deserves the same thing. And if you don't make room at your table for others, then you better be prepared, because there are going to be people who will turn that table over.